Today's shiur begins at the Mishnah that you will notice 11 lines from the top of Daf Chof. The points mentioned in this Mishnah you will find were referred to in our previous sugya. The Mishnah, Ad shelo nimchaka hamegillah, omra eini shoisa. If the Sotah says, I don't want to drink, and the Megillah, the parchment containing the Sotah portion that's written, has not yet been erased, Megillosa nignezes uminchosa mispazeres al hadeshen. The Megillah, the portion that was written out, is then put away. Nignezes, it's buried. It's the way we treat holy writings, so as to preserve their dignity. After all, it's not going to be used for anything. And the mincha, the meal offering, is going to be mispazeres, means burnt. Al hadeshen, deshen is a reference to a special fireplace in the temple courtyard for sacrificial offerings that have become, we'll say, unfit or unnecessary. The Megillah, this parchment portion that was written out for this woman, is not fit to be used for a Sotah, another woman that comes to the Beis HaMikdash with her Sotah needs. Nimchaka HaMegillah, if the Megillah is erased, V'omra Tameani, and she declares, I am guilty, I have been defiled. Hamayim Nishpochin, the water is poured out. Uminchosa mispazeres al beis hadeshen. Once she says Tameani, that's a declaration of her guilt, her confessing of her guilt, and therefore there's no need for the drinking of the water, and there's no need for her meal offering. Nimchaka hamagillah v'omra eini shoisa. If the Megillah was erased and she says, I don't want to drink, ma'arin osa umashkin osa ba'al korcha. We force her to drink against her will. And now the Mishnah goes on to describe what actually happens after she drinks. Eino maspekis lishtois. She doesn't actually have time to finish the drinking. Ad sheponeha morikos v'eineha boltos. Her face, morikos, turns an unusual color, and her eyes bulge. V'hi mismalis gidin, and her body is characterized by bulging blood vessels. Rashi says mismalis gidin hagidin shebilechoyeha, the blood vessels that are in her jaws, nofchim venirois kimleo gidin, they become bulging and appear as full of gidin. Gidin are blood vessels. V'gam besora nasis shita shalaficha, and her flesh becomes bloated in a ribbed fashion, maybe. Shita means row after row of bloatedness. V'hachitan b'sifri kemin sharbitin mizurakin ba, and the Sifri, the Medrash, describes this in a similar fashion. So the woman is certainly undergoing a major physiological catastrophe. Ve'heim omrim, and those present say, Hotziua, take her out, shelo tetameu azora. She's going to die. Don't allow her to remain there, so as not to impose defilement of the dead there where she's located. Now, the term Azora, the courtyard, is a reference to, as Rashi says, either the Nicanor gate, the eastern gate entering the courtyard, or the Ezras Noshim, the courtyard assigned for women that come to the Beis HaMikdash. So there seems to be a sense of urgency on the part of those that are present to make sure she is removed so that there's no tumas mace in that area. This is going to be the point of discussion later in the Gemara. Is that really a concern? Is there a problem for a corpse to be there? Granted, in the temple courtyard itself, no, but she's not there to begin with. The Mishnah goes on, Im yesh la zchus, oisa toilala. If she has zchus, merits, so that even though she drank the water and she may be guilty, the merits will delay or suspend for the time being the effects of the water. Yesh zchus toila shana achas, yesh zchus toila shnei shanim, yesh zchus toila shalosh shanim. There is merit that can delay her death for 1 year, for 2 years, and for 3 years. Mikan Omar Ben Azai. Based on this, Ben Azai concludes, Chayav Odom Lelamed Es Bito Torah. A father is obligated to teach his daughter. Note, we're talking about a female child, a daughter, Torah. Sheim Tishteh, if it should ever come to be that she's brought to the Beis Hamikdash as a Sotah and would drink the water, Teda Shazchus Toila Law. Rashi says, Teda Shazchus Toila Law, Tirevet Tilmad B'Parshas Sotah Shazchus Toila Diafina Mivniksav Nizazera, V'Niksa Yedei Zchuyos. She's cleansed as a result of having merit, Kedei Zriya Zera, the amount of time to bear a child. That's Tisha Chadashim. Yeshomim Yosim Fosh Gemara. How long will the zchus stand in her good stead? As the pasuk says, v'niksa, the cleansing of the by virtue of the merits, v'niz rozera, in order to bear a child. That would be 9 months. The Mishnah continues. Rebbe Ozer Omer kol hamalame bitoy Torah. Anyone who teaches his daughter Torah, lomda tiflus. He is teaching her, and here we have to translate, leaving room for the Gemara to ask its relevant questions, but here the translation would be, teaching a daughter Torah is teaching her foolishness. And that's a very difficult expression to leave uninterpreted, because the mere translation says that the Torah is foolishness, and you're teaching her foolishness, and heaven forbid, chas v'shalom, that we should refer to the Torah that way. Therefore, the Gemara will discuss this. Rabbi Yeshua, we continue, Omer, Roitza Isha Bekav V'Tiflus, a woman would prefer to have a kav as a measure of grain usually, and lightheadedness. Tiflus is levity, frivolousness. A woman would prefer to have that, a small amount, say a more limited income, but have a life of tiflus, mitisha kabin uprishus, and have a lot more, 9 kav of measure, which is symbolic of something much more than 1 kav. Uprishus is an expression indicating, we'll say, the opposite of levity, separation, seriousness, a life of earnestness. Hu hoya omer chosid shoitev rosh ha'orum. Rabbi Yeshua was known to say that the pious fool, the rosh ha'orum, the cunning wicked one, the isha prusha. These are terms that the Gemara will deal with when we get to it. These kinds of people are literally, they're described as destroyers of the world. Mevale, balui, is something that is decrepit, is worn out, that which is destructive. Rashi points out that each one of these will be explained in the Gemara. Before we continue in the Gemara, on the side we have a topic heading, Rabbi Meir Hoya Sofer. We'll see that Rabbi Meir was described as a scribe. He was, in fact, someone who wrote holy works, Sefer Torah scrolls, mezuzahs, tefillin. That's what a sofer does. So Rabbi Meir was a sofer. The Lomad me Rabbi Akiva ume Rabbi Shmuel. He was a student of Rabbi Akiva and of Rabbi Shmuel. The Hiskir Shoya Matil Kankantum L'Sochadyo. In the Gemara, Rabbi Meir reveals that he used to add we'll call it a chemical, kankantom. This chemical, when reacting with ink, would make it indelible. Under the mivneh, the structural note, a diamond appears, which highlights the names Rabbi Akiva and later Rabbi Yishmael. As far as an overview of the Gemara, we're not going to mention the details, just the overview. Rabbi Meir tells us about his background, and in the first version of the story, Rabbi Meir says that he used to study by Rabbi Akiva, and he then moved over to study by Rabbi Yishmael. Later in the Gemara, we're going to be presented with an opposite order of events, where Rabbi Meir tells us he used to learn by Rabbi Yishmael, and then he went over to learn by Rabbi Akiva. Who did he start off learning with? Will be an issue discussed later in the Gemara. And another issue that will be discussed is that, when Rabbi Meir was learning with these great rabbis, he informed them of his adding kankantom to the dio, and in the first story, the first version that we see, Rabbi Yishmael objected to the adding of the kankantom. In the second version, Rabbi Akiva is the one reported as prohibiting it. So there's going to be a seeming inconsistency in the story of Rabbi Meir's life as the Gemara presents two versions. And we will have to deal with that inconsistency later. As we turn to the Gemara text, you notice we open with a long marking. We just called it Rabbi Meir. It's Rabbi Meir telling us his story. The Gemara, Omar Rabbi Yehuda, Omar Shmuel, Mishum Rabbi Meir. So it was reported in the name of Rabbi Meir, Kashoisi Lomei Torah Eitzer Akiva, when I was learning Torah by Rabbi Akiva, Hoyisi Matil Kankantum L'Sochatyo, V'lo Omar Li Dofer. I used to add kankantum, that chemical that we said makes the ink indelible. I used to add it to the dio, to the ink, and he did not say anything to me. In other words, he didn't express any objection. Shebosi Eitzel Rabbi Shmuel, when I then came to learn by Rabbi Shmuel, Amar li bani ma malachtecha, Rabbi Yishmael inquired of Rabbi Meir, my son, what is your occupation? Amarti lo lablor ani. He says, Rabbi Meir said, I'm a scribe. Amar li bani have a zoyer, be careful. Shemalachtecha mleches shemayim hi. Your occupation is a holy occupation. And in writing holy works, Shemo tachsir ois achas, oi tiaser ois achas, nimtseis ato machriv es kol ha'olam kulo. You can end up by either missing a letter, and Rashi gives tangible examples of this. How, if let us say the pasuk that you're writing is Hashem Elokim Emes, and the Lord Almighty is truthful. And the word MS is spelled Aleph Mem Sof. If you drop the Aleph from that, you're going to leave just the letters Mem Sof. And Mem Sof would be blasphemous in this context. The word Mace means dead. So you can see how leaving out a letter could be something of a blasphemous nature. And as it's described here, you would Machriv es Olam, you're in effect destroying the world. Likewise, by adding a letter, the pasuk says, for example, gracious Bara Elokim. In the beginning, the Almighty created, and the word Bara is in the singular. He alone created the world. But if you add, let's say, a Vov to it, you would end up having the word in a plural form, also blasphemous. So the Gemara continues with Rabbi Meir responding, Martilo, I said to him, says Rabbi Meir, I have something, I have a chemical that I add to the ink, and the chemical's name is kankantom. The give and take here is already a little difficult to understand. On the one hand, Rabbi Yishmael is exhorting Rabbi Meir to be very careful not to add or subtract letters. Rabbi Shmuel responds, says, well, I've got this chemical. How does the chemical have anything to do with missing letters or adding letters? Omar li, and Rabbi Shmuel says back after, he says to me after I told him about my kankantom, he says, V'chi matilin kankantom l'soch hadyo. Are you allowed to add kankantom to the ink? HaTorah amra umacha ksav sheyuchal limchois. The Torah says, in the context of the parsha of the Sotah, that it shall be erased, which means a type of writing that can be erased. And if you're going to add kankantum, you're making it indelible. Rashi, toward the lower part of the narrow lines, ksav sheyuchal limchois. Rabbi Shmuel Sovar, Rabbi Shmuel is of the opinion, moichekin law min haTorah. According to Rabbi Shmuel, they could take a Torah scroll from a shul where Torahs are stored, from the ark in which Torah scrolls are kept in synagogues, and turn to the parsha of the Sotah, Bamidbar Parakeh, and from the Sefer Torah erase the necessary verses as we've learned in earlier Mishnayos. V'lo boi ksiva lishma, and Rabbi Shmuel doesn't require that the writing of the parsha has to be done with a specific woman, with a specific sotah in mind. The parsha sotah l'chuda kokopid. What Rabbi Shmuel is saying is that if you're going to use the kankantom, that might be fine and good, but it's not going to be good when you get to Bamidbar Parakeh, where the Parsha Sotah appears. That is, according to what Rashi says, that's where the prohibition of using kankantum in the eyes of Rabbi Shmuel. Let's continue in the Gemara. The Gemara at this point raises the difficulty that we mentioned before. My ka'omar le umay ka'mahader le. Then we look at Rashi. My ka'omar le umay ka'mahader le. My ka'omar le Rabbi Shmuel. Deko mahader le Rabbi Meir dover echad yesh li sheisa roshim ve'eino nimchak. What is it that Rabbi Shmuel said to Rabbi Meir that caused Rabbi Meir to say, oh, I've got this special chemical causing the ink to become indelible? Ma inin kantom eitzach yisur v'yisur. What is the relevance of this chemical to that which Rabbi Shmuel said, be careful, don't miss out letters and don't add letters? Now we go back to the Gemara, and the Gemara fills in the, we'll say, missing elements of the discussion. And by the way, this takes a couple lines. You see we have a long answer marking. Hachi ka'omar le. Thusly, he said to him. Now, after Rabbi Shmuel said, be careful with your work, Rabbi Meir says, Lo mibayo bechaseros v'yaseros deboki ano. Rabbi Meir, in responding to Rabbi Shmuel's warning, says, you have nothing to worry about as far as adding letters or missing letters. Deboki ano, I am an expert. It's likely that Rabbi Meir had a photographic memory. And I say that based on not only what we see here, but the Gemara in Megillah Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis. The Gemara here continues, Elo afilu lemechash lezvuv. But even a worry about a fly landing on the wet ink. The dilma osi v'yosef atage the dalid umochit le umashvi le reish. Just imagine. I hope everyone knows what the letter dalid looks like. Here you see it in the word dedilma. You see a dalid. At the roof of the dalid, the right-hand extreme of the roof juts out in the right direction, a little bit beyond the upright leg of the dalid. Now that little jutting out makes the dalid look like a dalid. Imagine a airborne insect would land on the wet ink just at that point. And we have a pasuk that says, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. The Almighty is Echad. is the embodiment of unity, of excellence, of singularity. There are a number of different interpretations as to what the word echad means, but it's a very significant word, a word of praise, of exaltation of the Almighty. However, if that Dalid roof abutment would be erased by the airborne critter, the ink that is responsible for that little extension will then be gone. And you'll end up with a word that would be of a blasphemous nature. Achir. So Rabbi Meir says to Rabbi Shmuel, you have nothing to worry about. Even a concern like that, Dovar echad yeshli, I have something, Shani mati l'sochadio, that I add to the ink, v'kankantom shmo, and the name of that chemical is kankantom, so that even if the fly would land on that extension, the ink would remain in the parchment with we'll say, an indelible mark remaining. So you have nothing to worry about regarding my being in this profession. Now the Gemara asks about the whole story and order of events. Eini, is that so? That which we've said till now, V'ho Tanya. Do we not have the following source? Amar Rabbi Meir Kashisi Lo Meitoretz Rabbi Shmuel. When I started off learning by Rabbi Shmuel, I added kankantum to the ink, and he didn't say anything. He said stated no objection. When I came to learn by Rabbi Kiva, he forbade it. Kashya shimush ashimush, kashya osra aosra. In comparing these two stories, first of all, there's a contradiction regarding by whom did Rabbi Meir learn initially, and the second is who prohibited the kankantom. Bishlama shimush ashimush lo kashya, as far as by whom he learned, first order of learning, there really is no difficulty. Meikora osalakame Rabbi Kiva. When Rabbi Meir started out his career of Torah study, he went to learn by Rabbi Akiva. Now Rabbi Akiva was known as a very deep thinker, highly analytical, and in order to be successful in Torah analysis, which involves comparing and contrasting different topics, resolving contradictions, and much, much more, one has to be familiar with the primary sources beforehand. You can't describe comparisons between two topics unless you're familiar with the two topics to begin with before you engage in analysis. Well, Rabbi Meir found himself jumping in to learn by the great Rabbi Akiva, but Kevan de Lomotzi Koma Libei, but I wasn't able to understand him, and as we explained, because I came at a point that I wasn't familiar with the primary sources. So also the Kamei, the Rabbi Shmuel, I then went to, that is, Rabbi Meir then went to learn by Rabbi Shmuel, the Gomar Gemara, and what Rabbi Shmuel would teach was basic text, basic sources. That's Gomar Gemara without the analysis. Hodar also the Kamei to Rabbi Kiva, and then he went back to Rabbi Kiva, Savar Svara, and then he engaged in analysis, analytical learning. Here you see a reference to a major issue regarding all those who are engaged in Torah study, and that is, at what point is one said to be qualified or ready, or say ripe, for engaging in Gemara analysis. And from here, one would conclude that if one is familiar with the primary sources, we'll say familiar with all of the Shas, at that point, he would then be ripe for analyzing and comparing the different topics that one finds throughout the Shas. So it's all a matter of order. There are those that misconstrue this type of discussion and present one form of learning as being greater than the other. That's obviously false. It's simply a matter of how does one pursue Torah learning in a proper logical order in order to achieve the ultimate goal of, in terms of when we say ultimate goal by way of Torah learning, to be able to analyze in depth all kinds of Torah topics. So it's all a matter of order. First, one will amass the primary sources, not engaging in too much analysis at that point. Once the primary sources are familiar, then one would be advised and directed to engage in analysis. And truth be told, it's almost a natural outgrowth of one who is familiar with many, many sources, with many primary sources. His own spirit demands of him to, hey, what's really going on over here? We've got to look into these things further. And that's all a natural outgrowth of being familiar with so many primary sources. So as far as Rabbi Meir's learning career is concerned, it depends at which point in time you look at things. Did he learn first by Rabbi Shmuel or first by Rabbi Akiva? Well, at the very beginning, he did learn first by Rabbi Akiva, but at that early point, he wasn't able to follow him. Then he went to Rabbi Shmuel. If you look at the story from the, we'll say, middle of the events, he was found learning by Rabbi Shmuel, then went back to learn later on by Rabbi Akiva. So we've resolved what's called shimush. Shimush, we didn't explain, it's literally shimush means serving, but it means the study of Torah. However, Ella Osra Kashya, who prohibited the use of the kankantom, was either Rabbi Akiva or Rabbi Shmuel. And between the two sources of information, we have the story told by Rabbi Yehuda versus the information in the Brisa, and there we have what appears to be a contradiction. Kashya, so that's left unresolved. Who was the one that prohibited the use of the kankantom? And once again, just for review purposes, which will be beneficial to know later in the Gemara, the objection to the use of the kankantom was primarily or restricted to the use of the kankantom in the writing of a Sefer Torah when you get to the Parsha dealing with Sotah, which leads us to understand that such an attitude, such an opinion means that section of the Torah, you could take a Torah scroll from any synagogue, bring it to the Beis HaMikdash, and use that section for the Sotah that needs the erasure to take place. Was it written for her? No. It wasn't written, that section of the Torah scroll wasn't written with this woman in mind. Well, it doesn't seem to matter. You don't need to have what's called ksiva lishma, the writing with her in mind when it comes to the writing of the Sotah Parsha. Now, before we go on in the Gemara, let us present an overview of what to expect. On the side of the Gemara, we have a nosei mivneh heading. Notice Roman numerals 1 and 2. And when you look in your Gemara text at the bottom line, you see a Roman numeral number 1. The Roman numeral number 2 will appear on the 5th line from the top of Amud Beis. These are Shnei Braisos, 2 Tanaic sources. Ubechol echad muva machloikis tanoim hakoshur liparshas Sotah. In each one of these Tanaic sources, there will be a Tanaic disagreement that has relevance to the issue of the Parshas Sotah, that section that's written on behalf or written on the occasion or for a Sotah. The Amud Beis, when we go further into the Gemara, you will see how Gemara menaseh lahamid hani tanoi kahani tanoi. We said that both of these Tanaic sources have a Tanaic disagreement within each one. The Gemara will try to do is to parallel the Tanaic controversy in source number 1 with the Tanaic controversy that will appear in source number 2. Avol b'hemshich yuva shnei dechios l'nisayon zeh. But as we then go even further into the Gemara, you will see, and if you want to navigate with markings, you might notice a double underlining, highlighting the names Rav Papa and Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak on Omid Beis. These are responses to the attempt of making the parallel between the two Tanaic sources. What we've just done is given you we'll say a skeletal overview structurally of what's going to happen in the Gemara. As far as the content, let us go right into the text. Tanya, Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Omer hoya Rabbi Meir, lakol matilin kankantom, into all holy writings, you can add this chemical, making the letochadio, adding the kankantum to the ink. We continue at the top of Omid Beis. Chutz mi parshas Sotah bilvad, with the exception of, I'm going to refer to this as Bamidbar Perek Hey, with the specific psukim in mind that deal with the Sotah. Even when you're writing a Sefer Torah, and that is very important to emphasize. When it says here, Chutz mi Parshas Sotah, do not make the mistake of thinking that this is a reference to the specific, separate portion that's written on behalf of a Sotah in the Beis HaMikdash. That is what Rabbi Yankiv talks about right now. But the Tanakama, this first opinion, Rabbi Meir we can say, is saying that the kankantom is fine, but not when you get to the writing of Bamidbar Hey, even in a Sefer Torah. Rabbi Yankiv Oimer, Mishmo, he has a different version of Rabbi Meir. At first we had Rabbi Yehuda's version of Rabbi Meir, now we have Rabbi Yankiv's version of Rabbi Meir. He says you can add kankantom to all writings, chutz mi parshas Sotah shel mikdash, with the exception of the special passage that's written on behalf of a Sotah that comes to the Beis HaMikdash. But as far as adding kankantom to a Sefer Torah, including Bamidbar Perek Hey that contains the Parshas Sotah, no problem. You can make that indelible. Why? Because the Sefer Torah is not fit to be used for the Sotah process in the Beis HaMikdash. According to the Tanakama, a Sefer Torah that wasn't written for her in mind is fit for using in the Beis HaMikdash if a Sotah case arises. According to Rabbi Yankiv, a Sefer Torah from a synagogue is not fit for that. What is used for the Sotah in the Beis HaMikdash, special, separate parchment is written out with the Parshas Sotah, but not a Sefer Torah. My binayu, what is the point of difference? And we, of course, already explained it, but here the Gemara asks, what is the point of difference between the first version and the second version? Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, limchik lo min haTorah ika binayu. The ability or the right, the license to erase the Parshas Sotah from a Sefer Torah, from a Torah scroll. According to the Tanakama, you can erase from a Torah scroll, and according to Rabbi Yankiv, you cannot erase from a Torah scroll. Vehani tanoi, ki hani tanoi. And the Gemara, this is the first stage of the Gemara, feels that the Tanaic controversy we just learned is parallel to the following Tanaic controversy. Desanya. Ein Megilasa Kshera Lahashkis Ba Sotah Acheres. The Tanakama of Source 2, Tanakama is the first opinion in Source 2, says that the Megillah, the portion written for a particular Sotah, is not fit to be used for another Sotah. So if the portion was prepared for lady 1, it cannot be used for lady number 2. What impression do you get from that? The impression is that the portion must be written with the Sotah in mind, with the specific Sotah in mind. Did we see in the previous source someone that would feel the same way? Well, if you say that a Sefer Torah from a synagogue is not fit for the Sotah process, that would be the same idea, because the Sefer Torah was not written with this specific Sotah woman in mind. So opinion 2 of source 1, maybe Rabbi Yankiv, would parallel opinion 1 of source 2. Let's continue. Rabbi Achi bar Yoshio Imer, Migiloso Kshera Lahashkois Bo Sotah Cheres. Rabbi Achi disagrees with the Tanakhama and says a Sotah portion written for one Sotah is fit to be used for another Sotah. Why? The feeling is that it doesn't have to be written with her in mind. So what if it was written for Mrs. Sotah 1? It can be used for Mrs. Sotah number 2. And that idea would parallel opinion 1 of the first source. Opinion 1 of the first source says you can use a Sefer Torah from the synagogue for a Sotah, even though it wasn't written for her specifically. Rav Achi also says you don't need the portion to be written specifically for her. So as far as paralleling opinions, opinion 2 of source 2 parallels opinion 1 of source 1. Everything that we've said till now is now going to be, we'll say, either reversed or brought into question. You can see we have a long marking. This is called a long rejection, a dechia. You'll notice that we've highlighted the key players over here. They are Rav Papa, and he's double underlined, and Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, a few lines later, he too. There isn't necessarily any disagreement between Rav Papa and Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, as Rashi points out, but rather each one is showing, it was like picking on specific opinions in the sources we saw and show how they are not parallel. In other words, when we claimed that opinion 1 of source 2 would parallel opinion 2 of source 1, Rav Papa will say, no, I don't see a parallel. And when we said opinion 1 of source 1 is parallel to opinion 2 of source 2, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak will say, no, not necessarily. They're not parallel. Why? That is left for the Gemara. Now we could take a look in the Gemara. Omer of Papa Dilma Lohi. Maybe not so. Not like we suggested. Ad kan lo ko'omar Tanakama. Now Tanakama means first opinion, but that's not very clear. The first opinion where? So it's first opinion of source 2. We tried to say opinion 1 of source 2 is parallel to opinion 2 of source 1. And the theme that we thought was common to the two was the idea that the portion that you're writing, the Sotah portion, has to be written with that particular woman in mind. Here the Gemara continues, says, not so. Ad kan lo komar Tanakama, the first opinion of source 2, Hassam. He said there that a Megillah written for lady 1 cannot be used for lady number 2. He said that Elokevan de intik l'shum Rachel lo hodra mintika l'shum Leah. Rachel and Leah are just arbitrary names of women, and intik, linnatek, is to have something removed from, and how does that figure over here? So the Tanakama of source 2 says that once a Sotah portion was intik l'shum Rachel, means it was, you can say it was removed from all other women and made specifically for Rachel. In other words, it's we'll say forcibly in a proactive way prepared for Rachel specifically, and not for anyone else. And therefore, if it's not going to be needed by Rachel, it can't then be, let's say, detached from Rachel and then used for Leah. There's too much specificity involved when the portion is written for a specific woman in mind. When it's written for a specific woman, it becomes, we'll say, reserved for her. You can't then remove it from her and use it for someone else. Avol, Torah, when you're talking about a Sefer Torah, the Stamo Ksiva, When the Sefer Torah was written, it wasn't written with someone in mind. It's still it's still vacant. It's still eligible. It's still available. It was written stam. It was written in a general fashion. Hachi nami demachkinon. In such a case, it wouldn't be such a big deal, so to speak, to take a Sefer Torah. Which wasn't reserved for any specific woman when they wrote Bamidbar Perek Hey. And now a Sotah comes along needing the erasure of Parsha Sotah. Use a Sefer Torah. So that opinion 1 of source 2 could very well accept opinion 1 of source 1, that you'd be able to use a Sefer Torah. Omar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, he too says, Dilma Lohi, maybe the paralleling that we did before isn't so. What did we try to do? What else did we try to do? We tried to parallel Rav Achi, who was opinion 2 of source 2, with opinion 1 of source 1. Ad kan lo koma Rabbi Achi bar Yoshia Hosam. Rabbi Achi allowed the Sotah portion written for lady number 1 to be used by lady number 2. You know why? That's we'll say his leniency is there, Ella b'Megillah. It's there with regard to a portion, a separate portion written on a separate piece of parchment for a Sotah. The ichtav l'shum olois ba'olam. It was written with, now olos means curse, because the writing of the Sotah portion for a Sotah lady involves its eventual erasure over the water and her drinking it and her possible dying from it. That's the concept of olos. So once you have a portion that was written with this mindset, it doesn't matter if it was written for lady 1, use it for lady 2, because there's a commonality here in that at least it was written with olos in mind. Aval Torah del Islamic Siva. A Sefer Torah is written for learning purposes. The reading of the Torah scroll in the synagogue is for people to hear the Torah portion, and that's their Torah learning. It's not written with olos in mind, with curses in mind. It's written for educational purposes. Hachinami delo machkinon. Rabbi Achi himself would say you cannot use a Sefer Torah from the synagogue for a Sotah woman in the Beis Hamikdash. Oh, so Rav Achi then would end up like Reb Yankiv from source number 1, namely opinion 2 of source 1, that said you cannot use a Sefer Torah. So at this point then, all that we tried to say before of trying to parallel the opinions of source number 1 with specific opinions in source 2, you see that cannot be proven, or you cannot maintain that position. We continue in the Gemara. Rabbi Achi bar Yoshia, he said that a Megillah written for lady 1 could be used for lady 2. Less lay, does he not hold from the concept of lishma? And we find this concept of lishma meaning specificity. Written lishma literally means for her. We find this in the case of divorce documents, as is featured in this source, that's an absolute necessity. Kosav legaresh es ishto. A man decided to divorce his wife, and he wrote up a divorce document. V'nimlach, and then he had a change of mind. I don't want to divorce her. The document is still extant. Motzoi ben iroi v'yomar lo, a member of the same community, same city, and when writing divorce documents, you have to indicate where it is written. So you indicate the city name. Someone from the same town meets up with him and says, "Hey, Amalo Shmi Kishimcha v'Shem Ishti Kishem Ishtecha. We have the same names and our wives have the same names, and I want to divorce my wife. So you give me the divorce document that you wrote up. You're not using it. Let me use it. Postel legarish bo. It's unfit for the second fellow to use it, because when it was written, it wasn't written with him nor his wife in mind." So then, how can Reb Achi bar Yoshia say that a Sotah portion that was written for lady 1 can be used by lady number 2. Amri, we answer, Hosam, in the case of the get, the Kosav law, Omar Rachmona. The Torah says, and you shall write for her, the Kosav lo Sefer Krisos, you shall write for her a divorce document. And by presenting it that way, we learn Bo'inon Ksiva Lishma. The Kosav law. Law means specifically for her. That means that the writing has to be with her in mind. That's a requirement by divorce documents. The Gemara asks, Hochanami v'yosa law. In the case of the Sotah, does it not say, and it shall be done for her? The Gemara says, that's true, it does say that, but my asiyah, what does the word asiyah refer to? Mechika, it refers to the erasing. It doesn't refer to the initial writing of the Sotah passage. So the writing of the Sotah passage does not require lishma, that it's written for that specific Sotah in mind. When it comes to the erasing of the passage, it has to be erased for that specific Sotah in mind, and not then have that water be used by someone else. Eino maspekis lishtois ad sheponea v'chulei. The Mishnah described that she practically just finishes the drinking and she starts to deteriorate right there, so that the setting in of her death is immediate with the drinking. Moni, who would say that? Rebbe Shimon, he. The Mishnah would appear then to be in accordance with Rabbi Shimon. Yomar makrives minchasa v'achar kach mashke. First, the mincha is offered, and then the drinking takes place. The kama de lo korva minchasa lo bat kilo maya. We know that as long as the mincha was not offered, the water would be ineffective. Dichsiv mincha zikaron mazkeres avon. The mincha is described as being part and parcel of the accounting of her sin, meaning part and parcel of the curse that affects her. So now, that having been said, that the mincha is an essential element of the curse, or if you want to put it more, bold terms, the mincha is part of the ingredients required for her death. Now, if that's the case, then when the Mishnah says that upon her drinking she will die, what about the mincha? The mincha was offered before. The mincha was offered before, so the first element in activating her death was taken care of. She then drinks, and immediately upon the drinking she starts to die. So, what's the order? First mincha, then drinking. Who says that? Rebbe Shimon. Amos Seifel, continue reading the Mishnah. It says in the Mishnah, if the woman has merits, even if she happens to be guilty, the merits will serve to delay or suspend the effects of the water. Ason l'Rabbanan. That approach is in consonance with the Rabbanan. Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Shimon, as we've learned earlier in the Masechta, says that merit does not suspend the effectiveness of the water. Person might have merits, but that's not going to stop the water from killing a guilty woman. So now the question is, our Mishnah is in accordance with whom? When you look at the immediate drinking death description, that sounds like Rabbi Shimon. First mincha, then drinking. And when you continue reading the Mishnah, when it talks about the effectiveness of merits, that's not like Rabbi Shimon. The Gemara answers, Rav Chisda, Ha'amani Rabbi Akiva he. Our Mishnah is authored by Rabbi Akiva, Yomar makrives minchasa v'achar mashke, as we've learned earlier in our previous year, that first mincha, then drinking, is what Rabbi Akiva also holds by. Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shimon agree on that point, the order. U'bizchus savar lo k'Rabbanan. When it comes to the power of merit, Rabbi Akiva, he's not bound by Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Akiva holds like the Rabbanan that merit is toila, zchus is toila. And that's, of course, what our Mishnah taught. So our Mishnah would be according to, as Rav Chisda's understanding, authored by Rabbi Akiva. V'heim omrim hotziuha shalotetame azora. The issue that the Gemara deals with here is what we already introduced earlier, and that is, why is there any necessity of taking her out of the azora? Now, the azora referred to here is the Ezras Noshim. It's the women's courtyard. The women's courtyard is called Machne Levia. There are 3 machnos that we speak about in the context of Tumah: Machne Yisrael, Machne Levia, and Machne Shechina. The prohibition of Tamei Mace or Mesim, that prohibition is restricted to the Machne Shechina. The Machne Shechina is defined as the temple courtyard, the Azora, the main Azora. That which is outside of the main Azora, till you get to the foot of the Temple Mount, to the beginning of Har HaBayis, that's called Machne Levia. Why the term Machne Levia? That has to do with the way the Jews traveled in the Midbar. For our purposes, though, all one has to recognize is that the woman, the Sotah, as she is about to die, where is she standing? She's not standing in Machne Shechina, she's standing in the Sha'ar Nikanor that doesn't have Kedushas Azor, or she's standing in the Ezras Noshim, the women's courtyard, which also has Machne Levia status to it. My Taima. Why in the Mishnah did they say, oh, take her out of here? The Sotah woman, when she finished drinking and they see that her eyes are starting to bulge, they say, take her out of here. Why? The Dilma Mesa, she might die. Well, Lememra, and here we start a long question. Lememra de Mesa also b'machne Levia. Are you suggesting then that a corpse would be forbidden to be located in Machne Levia, the Levite camp, which, as we said before, is a reference to the area contained in Har HaBayis, up till the Azora. Is a corpse forbidden over there? V'hatanya. Tomei meis muter likones lemachne Levia. Someone who has been defiled to the dead is allowed to enter the Machne Levia. V'lo tomei meis bilvad omru elo afilu meis atzmo. Not only is someone who was defiled by virtue of his having contact with the dead, but even the corpse itself is allowed in Machne Levia shenemar. The pasuk says, "Vayikach Moshe's atzmos Yosef imo," and Moshe took the bones, the remains of Yosef, together with him. And what does imo mean? Imo b'mechitzaso, together with him in his precinct. Where was Moshe Rabbeinu located? Moshe Rabbeinu was a Levi. You have then Moshe Rabbeinu with the remains of Yosef. That is what we call mace. The question then is, what are they all concerned about in the Mishnah? Why I say get rid of her, take her out of here? Oh, Amar Abaye explains, you know why take her out of here? Not because she might die, but because of the physical trauma that she is experiencing right now by having consumed the Sotah waters, and we see that her eyes are bulging. Shema tifros nida. We're afraid that she might all of a sudden have a nida blood release. This is the blood release that's unique to women. Nida is associated with a menstrual cycle, but here, because of the extenuating circumstances, that's what might happen, and someone who is a nida is in fact forbidden to be in Machne Levia. There are other kinds of tameim as well. Tumos, hayotzim migufo, tumos, different types of defilement that originate in one's body, different, and hence different emissions that create tumah. That kind of tumah is forbidden in Machne Levia, and because of what's happening to her, she might become a nida. She is not allowed to be there. The Gemara asks, L'meimra de bi'atusa marpi. Are you suggesting that bi'atusa is a term referring to fear, fright? We have to be careful how to translate the word, as you'll see in the continuation of the Gemara. But are you saying that bi'atusa, let's say fright, marpi literally means loosens up, and for our purpose it means it opens up the inner organs of the woman, the reproductive organs, from where the dam nida originates. The term you'll see in Rashi is the mokar. The mokar is the womb, the uterus. So are you saying that biatusa then causes that to happen? The Gemara says, yes. Fright does cause a blood release. Dechtiv, the pasuk says in the context of Queen Esther, in the story of Mordechai, Esther, and Achashverosh, it says there that when she heard of what was happening, vatischalchel hamalka ma'oid. That's the word. That's the pasuk. V'omar Rav shepir sonida. But the Rav explains what the pasuk is alluding to is her becoming a nida. So what do we see? Just like Esther had a frightful experience and she became a nida, so too the Sotah woman who is going through this traumatic experience, that is what we suspect might happen. So get her out of the machne levia. A nida is prohibited to be in a machne levia. The Gemara asks, this whole business of fright causing blood release, but we have learned charada misalekes damim. Charada, fear, actually stops blood flow. Well, then, is this not a source that contradicts that which we've said? The Gemara says when you deal with the realm of fear and fright and scaredness and whatever, there are two kinds. Pachda tsomis, biatusa marpi. Pachda, pachad. Let's try to explain it as a state of worriedness. It's not something sudden. It's extended worry. That tsomis means seals up. So that if a woman is, let's say, you have this often in wartime situations where people are in hiding, and it's a long-term fear that possesses people. It's not surprising that women's menstrual cycles stop. However, sudden fright, biatusa marpi, that loosens up the system and blood will flow. And we simply have to assume that in the case of the Sotah, when she drinks the water, the effects are rather sudden, and that would generate a dam nida flow, and that's why it was important for her to be removed from the machne levia, from the harabayas. Yesh la zchus oisutila. On the side of the Gemara under our notes, our topic heading, we have a very general heading. Lekama zman zchus toila. How much time can a merit that a woman may have actually suspend or delay the effects of the water? The Gemara quotes the Mishnah, Yesh lo zchus oisutila. And then the Mishnah went on to say, merit can suspend the effects, delay the effects for 1 year, for 2 years, for 3 years. The Gemara asks, and here we have a long question marking, so take note of the fact that this question continues till the third line from the top of Chof Aleph Amid Aleph. Moni Masnisen. Who could possibly be the author of our Mishnah that indicated Schus Toila for 3 years? Lo Abba Yosi ben Chonon v'lo Rebbe Ozer ben Yitzchok ish Kfar Doron v'lo Rebbe Yishmael. 3 names were just cited. Our Mishnah would not parallel any of them. Of course, what we see now is a source, a Tanaic source, where these 3 opinions appear, dealing with this very topic of Schus Toila. Desanya, im yesh lo zchus, toila lo shloisha chadoshim, kedei hakorasa ubar, divrei Abba Yosi ben Chonon. If a woman has merit, she is a Sotah, her merits can delay the effects of the water for 3 months. What's the significance of 3 months? That's enough time, in general, that a woman who was impregnated, you will notice her pregnancy. We're not saying that the pregnancy has relevance to the Sotah per se, but it's an idea that's derived from the Pasuk. Rashi says here, she's cleansed through merit, kedei, the amount of time, v'nizra zera, for the seeding of the seed. What does that mean? Shiur, enough time, she'ubar niku b'muberes, that the embryo would become visible or noticeable in a woman that's pregnant. So we usually use as a rule of thumb the time period of 3 months. The next opinion, Rebbe Ozer ben Yitzchok ish Kfar Dorom Omer Tisha Chadoshim. What is the extent of zchus and its effectiveness in delaying water effects? 9 months. Shnamar, the pasuk says, v'niksa v'nizra zera. The woman who drinks and she's clean in the sense she has merit. It says v'nizra zera halon omer, and elsewhere it says zera yavdenu yisupar, and that leads us to conclude zera haroi l'saper, that the Sotah time period is based on not just impregnation, but that type of, we'll say, seeding that people will eventually say praise of. When do people say praise in this context? When they have a child that can live. Well, that's a child that's born after 9 months of pregnancy. So from these psukim, on one pasuk says v'nizra zera, and the other pasuk from Tilim speaks about zera yavdenu yisupar. Yisupar means to tell about, to speak about. What kind of seeding is that which people speak about? That is a child that is born. How long does it take for the child to be born? 9 months. That's the amount of time that v'niksa v'nizra zera means. Next, third opinion. Rabbi Shmuel Omer Shnei Mosur Chodesh. Merit can suspend punishment or delay punishment for 12 months. This is the third opinion, 12 months. We're going to then read on in the source, but you're not going to see any reference to 3 years. And hence, we have our problem. Our Mishnah doesn't seem to conform to any of the opinions that deal with Schus Toila. Now, Rabbi Shmuel indicated 12 months. Even though you don't have an outright proof that Sotah's merits delay 1 year. We have a hint, we'll call it maybe an analogous case, that wherein we see 12 months of merit, or merit working to suspend punishment or delay punishment for 12 months. Tichtiv, as it says in Doniel, Perek Daled Pasuk Chav Daled. Just a word of background. Doniel was a leadership figure for the Jewish people during the Babylonian exile, during which time King Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian emperor, was ruling. He had a dream, and in the dream he noticed frightening images, and the dream indicated that Nebuchadnezzar, would be cast away from humanity and live amongst animals. That was very upsetting, of course, to Nebuchadnezzar. Doniel, one of his ministers, offered an interim solution for Nebuchadnezzar's benefit. Interim solution, meaning the dream, which was of a prophetic nature, is going to come to be, but if you want to delay it from taking hold, you want to delay it, here we'll have what Doniel said. And let's see what the pasuk says. This is a pasuk as you'll find in most of Doniel, in heavy-duty Aramaic. It says there, Lohein Malka Milki Yishpar Aloch V'chatoch B'tzidka Fruk. He says, Doniel says to the king, for delay purposes, I advise you to give charity. And through the giving of charity, you will redeem yourself. V'avyosach b'mechan anoyin. And your sins will be also redeemed through kindness, grace you show to the impoverished. And the Gemara continues at the top of Chof Aleph Amud Aleph. Hein teve archa lish leiv soch. This will serve as an extension for your shalva, for your peace and tranquility. So, what do we see here? We have tzedakah, charity, being suggested to Nebuchadnezzar as a means of gaining merit, so as to delay the negative prophecy of his dream. Uksiv, and the Pasuk goes on to say, Pasuk Chafei, Ko la mito al Nebuchadnezzar malka. All of that which he saw in his dream befell Nebuchadnezzar the king. Uksiv liksos yarchen trei asar. This is from Pasuk Chavav. It says it befell him at the end of 12 months, at the end of a year. So what does Rabbi Shmuel tell us? Merit delays punitive results for 1 year. No, we don't see 3 years though. The Gemara continues. Li'olam Rabbi Shmuel. Our mission was spoken about 3 years is actually in accordance with Rabbi Shmuel. Ve'ashkach kro di omar v'toni. There is found a pasuk that states delay of a year, but that year could be doubled and even tripled. So that if once you have a source for merit delaying for 1 year, and that time can be doubled and tripled, that's how you'll get to 3 years. What's the pasuk indicating that? Dichtiv koyamar Hashem al shloisha pishei Edom. The Almighty says that He can, we'll say, tolerate, withstand 3 sins of Edom. So we understand that toleration 1 time is for a year, and multiply that by 3, that's how you get to 3 years. And that, of course, is in accordance with Rabbi Shmuel. The Gemara asks, Umay afal pi shein raya l'dover zech l'dover. What is lacking in the psukim that we cited, that it's referred to as not a direct proof, but rather a zecher l'dover, a hint, a remez to this matter? Is there something, let's say, mathematically wrong with everything we just said? In other words, why can't we use the story involving Nebuchadnezzar and the pasuk involving Pishei Edom? Edom was a Gentile nation, the Edomites. Why can't we use that information to show how long merit actually delays? The Gemara said, I'll tell you why you can't use it as a formal proof, and we call it only a Zecher L'davar. Dilmo Shiny Oivdei Kichavim. It might be that the way the Almighty deals with idol worshippers, the lo mafkidina laihu. He doesn't mafkidina. In order to appreciate what this means, we look into the Rashi. Rashi across from here says, the lo mafkidina laihu ein mimarin min hashamayim lifkoid avinoisam aleim bo'ilam hazeh. When it comes to God's way of dealing with the Gentiles, it might be that He has a different standard for them as opposed to Jews. So when it comes to idol worshippers, He doesn't visit upon them their iniquity immediately. He waits, he allows them a certain amount of, we'll say, staying power, because all of this is in this world. When it comes to the world to come, they're absent, they're wiped out. Avol mi Yisrael, when it comes to Jews, and here we're talking about the Sotah is a Jewish woman, the Almighty will visit upon them their iniquity rather swiftly. It won't show the same degree of long-sufferingness as He would by Goyim, and the Almighty is very scrupulous, very critical and judgmental of Jews in this world. And we've explained this also in the past as a means of essentially constant cleansing of their sins. So that if you see this idea of merit suspending punishment for 3 years, but it's in the context of Edom and Nebuchadnezzar, that doesn't necessarily apply to the effects of merits upon Jewish people. With that, we conclude our shiur for today.